Really excited for this next session with Becky and Rachel, focused on portfolio management. So today we've covered the gambit of topics. We talked about product operations, product management, the shift from focusing on features to focusing on outcomes and becoming a more outcome-centric organization. So then to wrap it up today, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about portfolio management. What is it? More and more people are talking about it. Is it just something that big companies need, or is it something that all companies should be thinking about? When should they be making that shift to portfolio management, and how can they be doing that? So Becky and Rachel have a really great deck that they've shared. Hey, Rachel.
Sorry, it was running some sort of system check. Wouldn't let me in.
Well, this is pretty impressive. With a full day of virtual sessions and 15 speakers in the booth, we've only had one person that had some issues. So I would count that as a win, because we ultimately got there.
Well, it's just a matter of how long it took to solve the issue, because I did run into issues too.
So we've just got some really good problem solvers.
Right. Well, hey, Rachel.
Hi, Becky. How are you? Nice to see you.
Well, nice meeting you too. I'll see you again. Hello, everyone. I'm here again, Becky Flint, CEO and founder of Dragonboat. I'm excited to have Rachel here. And Rachel is the SVP of Product and Tech at Insight Partners for Center of Excellence. So I'm actually going to transition this to Rachel and do a little bit intro of you and the Insight team.
Thanks, Becky. Really happy to get to join you to do this today. I always have such a great time talking with you and learning with you. So as Becky said, I work at a company called Insight Partners. We are an investment firm. We are an investor in Dragonboat. We believe very strongly in the amazingness of this product and team. I am part of what's called the Product and Tech Center of Excellence, COE. Insight has a large group of people who are folks who've worked inside of tech companies, and we are all dedicated to the success of the companies in our portfolio. The team that I am on, we focus obviously on product and tech, and we support companies in scaling their companies, thinking about growth, trying to get questions answered as they address all of the challenges that come with running a very fast-growing tech company. And we love to support them in getting their good ideas out into the world through thought leadership and community work. So I'm very excited to get to partner with Becky in this space and talk to all of you.
Thank you, Rachel. It's really amazing. Met with you even before the investment. We've done quite a bit of the sessions as well around portfolio management. It's such a critical topic today, especially if product is now the real business. It's not IT anymore. It's no longer R&D. So maybe I'll just kick it off and start with a little bit of how portfolio management come into play, and then we kind of have the conversation going on portfolio management, product management, how things evolve. And going back in time a little bit, a long time ago at PayPal, where it was a scaling and was growing very quickly, and we started to not be able to build product. We cannot bring the product to the market. There's so many dependencies, there's so many competing initiatives, competing goals, that we're just not being able to move. So walking the room into the VP to say, hey, we need to rethink how we build product. We need to take a portfolio management approach. And that was a big debate for us in the moment, say, hey, portfolio, is it PayPal a product, right? So the teams are building features, not really portfolio. So that's really a moment for us to say, step back to look at evolution of portfolios. As traditionally, the most earlier way to think about product portfolios is things that you can acquire separately and function separately. Then later on, when you start to have a digital part of things, that's started with the IT and the projects. They're separate in terms of there's a start and an end, right? So there's a separate project portfolio. And then when it comes to a time when you have product like a PayPal, is it one product? Is it a portfolio? It is actually a one product portfolio. Think about it. Why is it one product? It is actually not one product. For PayPal, at least a multiple products at play. Their users were using it to pay things, to buy things. They're merchants who use the PayPal to accept payments and run their business. Obviously, underlying there's payment processing and the risk management and so on. So actually, it is not just one product, it's a multiple product, and it's a multiple product portfolio. And so that is really the way looking at the portfolio in a different lens now. We're very familiar with all these products, right? Underneath this product, the people building those products are actually leading a portfolio. So the concept of portfolio management started to become very different. The way we viewed it also very different. So if we were to redefine in the way we are today, in the software, in the digital space, is that we really think about portfolio. It's no longer like individually wrapped things. It's really how we evaluate different investment options and how do we allocate into different investment options. Just like Insight, larger portfolio of companies, right? So those are investment options. So from a product perspective, we put people and resources and into the parts of the product, so that we'll create outcome that we desire. And different time, different stage, you have a different desired outcome. Sometimes growth, sometimes the margin, sometimes both. So that portfolio management not only has evolved to think about the digital product as a portfolio in a different ways to solving customer or business problems. We also start looking at the portfolio as a multiple dimension. So sometimes ago, people ask us, say, what is your hierarchy? The thing is, the hierarchy kind of defines sort of a set of the breakdown. But the reality is you have to look at your portfolio in different lens. Sometimes you have to look at different segments of your market. Sometimes you have to look at your different goals, right? Growth, margin, and all that, and different parts of your product as well. So this is really the concept of portfolio management that we took from back in the days as individual products separately acquired to a digital intertwined one product portfolio that serves multiple dimensions. So the adoption and the practice of portfolio management all of a sudden becomes something not just for large mature companies. It is true for every companies. Every product companies will have to have portfolio management. So that really lead to us to say, hey, if every company needs to have portfolio management, do we all jump in and start working on it now? The yes or no. The part when become more pressing is really when the portfolio when your company start to get bigger, when you have multiple teams, and all these cannot be managed by your head, and how you decide your investment decision, how you evaluate, how you measure will all have to change. That's where the scaling of the company, multiple teams, the dependencies and competing goals is where portfolio management became more essential, and you need to spend more time to think about it than with something just saying, I will deal with it when it comes, right? So one of the problems really bring to front and center. So I want to take a second to kind of go back to Rachel, that she has worked with so many companies in scaling around some of the challenges and thoughts around portfolio management.
Thanks, Becky. Yeah, so I love what Becky said about reimagining how we think about portfolio management, because I do think there's this historical approach to it, which says it only matters for you when you have more than one product. And as Becky has described, we think that that's way too late to be taking a portfolio mindset and approach to product management. So I work with a lot of different companies, get to see lots of different scaling environments as companies grow. But there's some very common things that we see across companies that are doing this successfully. And that's really how they think about the core elements of their business that allows them to then scale effectively, quickly, keep alignment in place, understand what's happening in the business. But we really think about R&D focused specifically in two areas. One is the processes and organizational structures around the design and development of the product. So think of this as the ideas and strategy side of the house. This is where we're thinking about what's our vision, we're gathering data, we're researching, we're learning about the market, about customers, about our own capabilities, and then we're designing a strategy around that to deliver high growth products. This is really the domain of product management and ultimately portfolio management, but this is where the thinking and designing and exploring happens. And then there's the part of the organization that does the actual design and development and execution, and this is the organization itself. And here's where we're thinking about the people and how they're working together, how they're aligning to work, how they're executing. And here's where we want to focus on building a high growth organization. And this to me is really the foundation for being able to do product management and then ultimately portfolio management. Because as organizations scale, the number of people, the number of ideas, the number of tools, the numbers of systems, the numbers of connections between people grows exponentially. And so if we can't figure out a way to put things into logical sort of buckets and align those elements together, we as leaders and as people in the organization trying to organize work will quickly be overwhelmed by the amount of information that we both have to receive and communicate. So when we think about setting up a really healthy R&D environment for scale, we think about one, everything should be built around teams. So we want teams that are well formatted. We know who needs to be on teams. We need to know if are all of our teams complete, and we want those teams to be really well functioning. So they have agreements with each other, they know how they're working, they have shared language, they have shared processes, shared cadences. And we want to organize as we scale teams around value. Now, companies do this in a multitude of different ways, depending on their products, their technologies, their markets. But you want to think about how our teams lend to value, whether that's product by product or by different elements of customer outcomes, et cetera. But we want teams to be organized this way. And you can see like everything we're doing is putting things into buckets, which makes it easier for us to gather data, transmit information, and organize ourselves. So teams becomes the lowest common denominator. We build everything around that. And then we also want to have clarity of the work itself. So if you go to the next slide, we want to really understand and have shared language around work. And so this is everything from true north or that guiding function of the business down to what a team is working on every day. And we want to know that when we say story, if that's language that we're using, that everybody knows what that means. We have a general idea of how big those things tend to be. We know who's working on them. Those things can roll up into something like features, epics. I heard on the last conversation, we were having this conversation about what are the words. And we really want to be consistent with that inside of our company, right? We don't have to use the same words as other businesses, but we need to use the same words within our own business. And knowing what these chunks are and knowing who has responsibility for them, again, lets us be more consistent in how we understand our organization. So when companies start to scale, we want to see these kind of structures start to really emerge. And that's going to make it so much easier to then have that portfolio mindset and think about, okay, how much do we want to invest in initiative A? We do that investment through the people that are working on it and the amount of time that they spend, and we can know the answer to those questions.
Right. Yeah, it's so true, Rachel, that, I think one of the key challenges that, not only, I experience, I'm sure you experience in the companies you work with, and, our customers sometimes run into that problem as well, is the difference in terminology. So in in the same company, different teams, they call initiative. Some of them are like features. Some of them are like really huge initiatives, like, year long or several quarters long. So yeah, having consistency across the board, so we know not only we know how things align to strategy, and aligning different buckets of effort and the similar size of the effort to across teams is hugely important.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
So, and that's really led to something, why we need a consistency, why we need a definition is because, as we have a one product portfolio, really it's multi-product. but they are dependent on each other. So going back to the PayPal example, where you can say, okay, I have a consumer who's a user who uses PayPal to buy things online. And then this consumer product manager or product lead has to depend on the payments team, because if you consumer uses the product, the payment needs to support it and also tied to the risk. And then also, like, payment has to go through to the merchant. So the reconciliation and then the experience are also tied together when two parties, the user and the merchant, interact through the same platform. So the portfolio dependency is one thing really forces us not looking at this as the 4 different teams, and really just 4 different teams need to work together and make the product work. So what does it mean when you have that kind of dependency? Is that you have many goals. Each of the team may have a different North Star. They may have a different goals. They may have a different strategy. And sometimes they can conflicting with each other, right? So using example again to consumer, if you as a user, as a head of the product running the consumer, you want to make sure you can have a user buying experience as frictionless as possible. I don't want you to enter a lot of stuff, do a lot of fraud analysis and so on. But then that also likely could lead to higher fraud. So if you want to reduce fraud, you want more checks and balances. So now you can see the frictionless buying experience of our consumer. It doesn't necessarily work the best for some of the highest control, reduce fraud loss goals that the risk team may have. And the other example, some of you who've been around for using PayPal for long enough time to know that before PayPal kind of forces you to always use balance or bank to pay, you have to, every time you have to go change it to credit card because you want to pay with the credit card. The reason behind it was because the credit cards are higher cost. So the payments team, their goal is to make sure to minimize the cost, right? So that there is a conflicting goal as well. So as an entire PayPal product, then how do you manage both the technical and the product dependencies from the consumer with the payments and risk teams, as well as manage the conflicting goals each of these product teams work together? And that's really where, not only portfolio management come into play. To run effective portfolio management, the first thing to do is actually taking on a outcome-focused adjustment to decide where we are going to focus more and how we're going to adjust. If a fraud is rampant, we're going to dial the fraud engine so that we can having higher control and potentially at the cost, some of the cost at the consumer experience. But then consumer teams should also think about other things they could do to offset some of the fraud adjustment. So as a portfolio as a company, they're thinking about how do you manage different elements and needs that you have to look at different outcome, different focus, and adjust it across from time to time, and not have a static saying, here's my prioritization, here's my prioritization method, and that will be end of it. That's not responsive. So, so now we know in the fast-moving industry, when you have a digital product, you have multiple moving pieces. They could have dependencies, and often they have competing goals. So how do you manage it? You want to adopt a responsive way to do portfolio management, product portfolio management, and that means you start with aligning your product goals, not individually across the board. Then you need to negotiate and plan among your dependencies. It will be there. And regardless of how you slice and dice your organization, regardless of how you how you create your org structure or product teams, it will be there. It takes more than one team to build a product. And then based on the outcome, based on the result we're achieving, and you decide whether we should change something or not. So that really leads to something we call strategic planning. But strategic planning in a way, in the modern way, is a little bit different. So let's just go talk about strategic planning.
So this is another topic that comes up all the time when we're talking to companies as they're scaling, is that I think when companies are earlier in their life cycle, when they're new, the business strategy is the product strategy, right? Because we're trying to get product market fit. We're just trying to get those first customers on board, right? Everything is incredibly clear in terms of we need to, make sure we meet the market where it needs to be with our product. As we achieve some success and we start scaling, we have lots of new opportunity in front of us, whether that's in a single product or in multiple products. And we start to have to make choices about where we want to invest. And so we have to move away from having this sort of what is often, kind of a very simplistic strategy process to something that's a little bit more robust and a little bit more structured, because we, one, have more opportunities and we have more decisions to make. And two, we have a more complex organization that we're trying to keep aligned and moving forward. So when we think about the process of going through a strategy cycle, and let's just focus on the product strategy cycle for now, there's a strategy formulation that has to happen. This is making the strategy. And there's a whole bunch of work that has to happen there. And typically we're doing this out ahead of the execution process. We're, thinking 3, 6, 12 months out into the future, depending on where you are as a company. We're looking at the market. We're thinking about where we're going. We're thinking about what our competitors are doing. We're thinking about, financial targets that we have. And we're aligning as a senior leadership team often around what are the next best things to do with the product. Meanwhile, the strategy deployment process is in play. And that's the product development. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's, engineering, R&D teams building the things that we strategically decided that we wanted to do. And these systems need to be tightly coupled because there's new learning and information happening as we build and as we deploy current strategy that feeds back into the new ideas we have going forward for the future. So it's not just a one-way system, it has to be multi-directional. And again, this is where it really is beneficial for companies to start thinking about how do we intersect these two different systems that are running. And that to me is really where portfolio management lives, because it's helping us say, these are the bets that we want to make in the future. This is the information we have about how our current bets are performing today. And we need to be responsive, not just on an annual cycle, but more frequently saying, oh, we've learned something new here. Maybe we need to steer to adjust a little bit our current execution plans so that we're staying in line with where we want to go in the long term. So this is just a picture of a little bit more blown out description here. The product strategy process, which is sort of saying, where are we going next year? What are those big initiatives that we think we're going to try to tackle? There's a lot of investment choices that are going to happen there. How do we build a balanced roadmap of that, right? What's the sequencing? What's the size of everything we're going to do, the size of investment, and then rolling out that final plan. But meanwhile, we've got that healthy execution process happening that's continuing to feed information in.
Right. I think, Rachel, you're really spot on. One of the observations that I also had is that, long time ago, we did this, 5-year vision, 3-year strategy. And then next you go to 3-year strategy, 1-year operation plan. And now we do 1-year strategy and quarterly. And now even do like a 3-month or 6-week kind of realignment. The market just moving so quickly, where strategy could be adjusted. The North Star is still there. The vision is still there. But adjusting the strategy and adjusting the initiative, the composition of the initiatives to become faster and faster.
Yeah, I like to think about the difference between planning and steering, right? I mean, we still, as a company, we need to know what our longer term goals are. We have destinations we're trying to get to, but there are so many different routes for us to get there, so many different ways to do that. And so to me, like, have a clear destination, have a clear vision, have a clear long-term strategy, but lots and lots of chances for steering along the way.
Right. Totally true. And that's really where leading to a lot of conversations we have internally, right? So, going back to when different teams started to look at their focus and aligning towards the goals we want it to be, you start to say there are different paths. So how do we decide the path we want to go, at least the path we think we're going to go now? And then how do you decide you prioritize across different areas? So going back to the example we had earlier, the consumers versus the payments versus the risk, they all have different focuses. So it depends on where we are. We have to decide how do we plan the allocation now. It is very challenging because strategic planning, for some of you who may have practiced that before, it's very time consuming. It requires lots of spreadsheets and decks and numbers, right? So that kind of holds back on companies and teams to say, yeah, I want to do it, but it takes too much time. I can't do it. So the idea is that's why we, in the past, we could have this legacy system. We get a giant waterfall project plan. We plan everything out. We execute it because the pace at that time was okay to work that way. Now things are happening in the days, in the sprints, in the scrums. So things are happening so fast. You bring product to market so quickly. The market changes so quickly. But you cannot just say that's the reason we don't have a strategy and alignment and where we go. So having a way to understand where we want to go and visualize and plan these dependencies and also understand our allocations is so critical in terms of managing a responsive product portfolio. And when I say dependencies, quite often people think about, oh, I have dependencies because I have to do A first and B next. It's kind of like sort of like a project management sequence type of dependencies. Yes, that's one type. The other dependency, for example, you would, so that's the one we mentioned earlier, is like a feature dependency. You work on this, you work on this. But there are also resource dependency. My team depend on, the consumer team depend on, let's say, the risk team to do some of the work, or vice versa. So now you start to have the portfolio level dependency. And sometimes it's the product experience dependency. So if we want to have a mobile experience, but the web experience is out of sync, then people will have something that looks very different, not coherent. So you also have to think about how this will tie together. So all trying to highlight is that the user interaction and the product experience across multiple teams becomes so intertwined and so ingrained in today's product team in any sizes. So understanding the goal and the focus and the potential conflict and the plan and negotiated dependencies is very crucial for your team to be empowered and autonomous. Why? People say, well, portfolio management feels like a very top-down. And you give a North Star and everyone does what you need to do. That's not really true. The strategy need to be aligned so the team actually can move forward towards the direction we want it to go. The team still has a very large autonomy in terms of how we realize that strategy. So that's number one. It's not micromanaging, saying what you do, but more of saying, here's the path we're taking. Let's try to take that path. If not, let's revisit. So that's the first part. Second part, I think a lot of team members may not realize that if for any team try to achieve their goals are dependent on the other teams, and your priority may not be their priority, you are not empowered. You feel powerless because you can't move. You're stuck. And that's why the upfront alignment and the upfront understanding of dependencies so that you can gain the support for the other teams, it will actually help you to truly empower your team with the direction and with the resources and support needed so that they can do their best part of the design, the product, and discovery. So that's really something that we want to talk about is that as a portfolio, one of the key thing about portfolio is to say holistically, where are we going to focus on our work, where we are going to allocate our resources, because the most valuable asset in a company, especially in today's tech company, are our people. So where should they focus? And that really is, not only we would tie our features and product towards the outcome, we need to also adjust it using an example that if our goals are driving revenue, reduce cost, and invest in the future, and then we set up different metrics to measure these goals, and we decided to, let's just say we did an even split, 30-30-30 for each one of them. But if we can make more progress driving revenue than we plan for based on the current product, and then if we're not making as much progress in terms of fraud losses, then we need to reallocate adjust our portfolio allocation as well as the focuses so that your team can work on the right thing, not just based on the priority of what you think about that right now, really holistically, what kind of outcome the product organization going to produce across the board. So just do a quick recap of product management versus the portfolio management, and we're going to take some questions from the audience. A lot of times, the people think about product management, it's a component of portfolio management. And so not that you would give up on product management to only do portfolio management, but there are differences. Product teams tend to focus on product goals, where portfolio management really thinking about a longer term portfolio goals across multiple teams, sometimes quote unquote at the expense of one team's goals to support the others, because collectively it's more it's a higher level of the best outcome for the portfolio at the moment of the time. And quite often we think about product team, we think about them as a full stack teams, different cross-functional teams, like Rachel showed earlier, construct of various teams where the collaboration really for the most part within that team. Now, when we start to think about portfolio management, we will have a lot more cross-team collaboration required. And so that we build not only just a product roadmaps, we'll create outcome roadmaps. Really think about where we need to be and then where each of the teams are contributing to the outcome and how do we adjust across the teams. Then we also not only looking at the customer feedback, quite often customer feedback, customer insights, a big part of the input to the product teams. We also need to think about the things that are longer term, right? Customer insights, not just the focus on today. When you think about a portfolio, really across the spectrum of all the customers you have today and the customers you don't have today yet, but that they are the ones that help you to say, what's the next phase? What's the next phase of the product? What's the next phase of the company? Where do we go? Do we build, beef up what we have today? Do we go deep? Do we go broad? Do we have different use cases? Do we go to different industry? Do we expand into different market? So take the customer you have today and inspire what it could be. Then you build your additional product and product teams and areas and to beef up your portfolio. Could be also acquisition as well. So that when you think about that, also is that portfolio is more than just, I can give you visibility of what's going on. Sure, what's going on, to know what is going on is great. But again, doesn't get us to where we need to be. So when you think about portfolio, really is to say, we will provide an alignment or agreement we heard earlier on what we want it to be. And then you allow your team to have the ability and the direction to innovate, to empower them to solve customer problems. And then we adjust it across the board. So with that said, I think we kind of went through the concept of modern product portfolio management. And that is, it's a one product portfolio, is multidimensional, and need to work together, not only at the individual level, also across the team level. Now, if you're wondering, this sounds great, how do we bring this to our product teams, to our empowered product teams? 3 simple steps. Start with someone, recognize that. Recognize it's time for change. It's time for change to think about it more than just the product. Think about it's a portfolio of goals, a portfolio of customer segments, a portfolio of teams working together. Rethink how you decide your product allocation and prioritization. It could be you. And once you decided to bring this to your team, to your company, you don't have to boil the ocean. You can start with one team, a couple teams, because the concept could start from anywhere. But then you can get buy-in and expand it to broader. And last but not least is having a tool. Imagine long time, 10, 15 years ago, when Agile just came out, everyone think that's a great idea, but what do we do? How do we do that? How do we do Agile, right? So once you have the right tool, the Jira's and Rally, and then it all starts to make sense, right? It helps you to move along with the best practices. So that's why Dragonboat came to place in a way that we recognize responsive product portfolio management is essential to the success of every software company, every product company. We recognize for the team to adopt that, they need help, they need to sort of choose, they need the best practices. So Dragonboat is the tool to help you to bring responsive product portfolio management into your team to empower your product teams.
Great. Well, you might be more familiar. I think we get to go to the Q&A, Becky?
Yes.
Okay, great. We've got a bunch of questions here. Oh, Baji's back. Thank God.
I can step in and help ask the questions so that you guys can just focus on answering them. So we're getting a lot about responsive PPM and that framework more specifically. So one person asked, do you think responsive PPM will replace product management as people evolve to how inclusive of all needs it seems to be? So is it a replacement? Is it complementary? Is it a framework that kind of builds into it?
So I think it's a complementary, because it's, first of all, you do product management. The product management alone is not enough. Just like say, does it replace Scrum? It doesn't, right? Scrum is Scrum, engineering process still there, but it's not enough. You can't just have agile teams. You cannot just have a customer-focused product. You have to product ultimately drive business outcome by delivering customer outcome. How do you do that? It will require a portfolio approach, because it takes more than just one team, and you have to think about multiple areas. So it is a complementary to what we have today.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think you don't discard core product management practices. They are incredibly important and necessary element of a system that also includes responsive portfolio management, right? We need to be managing the products. We need to be managing, the inbound information, prioritization, all of that stuff. Having really strong practices there makes it even better when you do responsive portfolio management. And I think I'll go back to what I said before, which is there's a period in a company's growth cycle where everything is incredibly clear. If you've ever worked at a startup, this is a very joyful time to be part of a company, because we're incredibly aligned, because we only have one job, and that's to not die, right? Like, we're just trying to make it and survive and let everybody know about our brilliant idea and our brilliant product. And it's an incredibly exciting time. And then if we are successful with that, this wonderful new world opens up to us with different customers and different product ideas and more teams, because we have more money to spend and we have all these new options. And that is amazing, but it can also be a really challenging transition, because with that bounty of choice comes a lot of new friction inside of the organization, because we have people going in different directions and we have communication problems, et cetera. And so that's when we need to start thinking about up-leveling those practices and saying we need additional tools in our arsenal about how we're making choices, about where we're investing, and how are we keeping people aligned.
Right.
It's a good problem to have, is what I'm saying.
It's a champagne problem. Still a problem.
What change agent or kind of internal champion have you seen as the best person to spearhead this transition?
Do you want to go first, Rachel?
Oh, I think a product leader is a great one, right? Because so in my experience, when I'm often having this conversation, is I'm talking to somebody in a leadership role in product, and they're saying, it's obvious to me that I'm lacking some information, I'm lacking some clarity about my organization, and I need better metrics, I need better dashboards. I can't see what's going on, right? They're having some sort of existential crisis about feeling like they're losing their ability to provide good information and direction to their teams. And so often that's an R&D leader, often a product leader, and they're a great person to sort of all of a sudden have this revelation of, wow, it would be great if I, had better access to information about how we're investing, if we could make better, smarter decisions about how to shift those things over time. So that's a place I often see this manifesting. I would bet you see other things as well, Becky.
No, I think you're totally right. It's usually people start to have some sort of a problem, or sometimes it's not really problem, it's stagnation, right? So using example, I joined a company at one of my last company where they were growing, they have a really good customer, then be like, everyone say, okay, now what? So you have a customer, we kind of go there, then now what? We're not like go to the next level. So that was the moment where like, hey, we need a product leader. So then I come in and help to build the first product organization. And one thing I led is the strategic planning. I asked them to say, hey, if our revenue, we have a double our revenue for next year. The funny thing is, I say, wait, let's go to a room. Let's everyone get a piece of paper, like we get executive team together to say, what do you think? How are we gonna go to double our revenue, right? So everyone has different strategy, right? You get a new verticals, international, so you go enterprise, you go freemium, like 6 different strategies in the room. Imagine if you don't have someone to get that together and align where we're gonna go, then they just go to teams, ask them to do different things. And teams say, how do I prioritize apples and oranges and grapes, right? It's different. You can't even prioritize that. So that's the first thing, is to align our strategy. Second part is say, hey, you don't say I can only pick one. So we pick the main strategy, which is double down our existing business and making it more scalable, faster installation, because we can realize revenue faster because we haven't taken over the market yet, but we were leading. But we also want to invest in the future. So we put a small investment, like 10% of our resources on something else. So that 10% of the investment, 3 years later, become the biggest product line of the company. But we weren't ready. We had to build the core, expand that, and invest on what we're gonna build for that small area. It's nascent, but we can't just put a bunch of money. Sometimes money and resources doesn't get where you need to be. So having that alignment on strategy and understanding, what kind of areas sort of investment on nascent, it's really something where, to answer the earlier question, say, what is changing is that people feel something's off, but they can't figure out what is off. And that's quite often, that's the moment you say, hey, we don't do portfolio management. Maybe we should take that principle and figure out where we are, where are the things that, preventing from us to grow faster, or give us new ideas where we are. How do we handle all the things we have?
Rachel, you're in a really unique situation at Insight Partners because you get to see across so many of your portfolio companies, and being on the product and technology side, you're able to partner with the product leaders and help them as they're scaling. So I'm curious, do you see consistencies in some of the challenges and struggles that your portcos are facing?
Yes. Yeah. And I think a lot of it has to do, there's different variables, but I think, if any like 2 variables start to increase, like the scaling problems start to manifest. And that is actually what I see a lot, is the challenges of scaling. I like to remind folks, like I said before, these are good problems, right? Feeling like you don't have enough capacity in engineering to do all the things that you want to do, like, you would like that to always be the case, because if you have too much capacity in engineering and not enough stuff to work on, you've got a bigger organizational problem. So like especially in product organizations, we start to feel these challenges. And I think they all relate to scale in some way. It can be scale in terms of the number of people we have inside of our organization. It can be scale in terms of the number of features, components, products, whatever it is we're offering to the market. It can be scale in terms of the markets that we're in. And any of those things, I think, can be a triggering element to starting to have some of these questions about how we're making decisions, where we're investing people's time and money, what outcomes are we getting. And I think what Becky's pointed to with outcomes, I think, is a really important piece to pay attention to here, because this is a very common theme I see, which is that companies haven't clearly thought about the outcomes that they're trying to drive. Like, they have financial targets, they've done the budgeting, they're thinking about all this stuff, but they haven't gotten clear with themselves on how will our customers' lives be different if we achieve these goals? How will we as a company be different if we achieve these goals? How will our technology be different? And answering those outcome questions is sort of an unlocking moment to make everything else easier after that. Because what I see people struggling with is trying to do things like portfolio management with no outcomes, right? And then it's just like shuffling cards. You don't really have anything driving you to tell you which decision of the 20 you have in front of you is most important right now. So those are some of the common things I see is these variables start ticking up, you start to feel more friction inside of the business, and you realize, we thought we had clarity of what we were trying to do, but maybe we actually haven't developed that clarity enough.
Right.
And is there a kind of point where you see and you say, you guys should be doing portfolio management? Is that a critical threshold that you've seen consistently across these companies?
I'd say and it's this complexity question. So like, I wish I could say like, it's when you reach 120 people and you have 17 or more features and you have 4 technologies. I don't have an answer like that because of course there's so many variables at play, but I think about organizations, they're like highly complex networks, right? Lots of little nodes connecting, and most of those are people. And there's a place where the number of connection points becomes unmanageable just by hallway conversations or Zoom meetings, or I sent out the PowerPoint deck. Doesn't everybody know what we're supposed to be doing? And there's this inflection point where the complexity of the organization reaches a point where information flow starts to fail. You got 6 different strategies in the room. Everybody thinks they're doing the right thing. It's all best intention, but why are we running in all these different directions, right? Those little signals are the moments when you start saying, we need to be more disciplined about how we think about how we're investing across all of our multitude of product opportunities. And I think sometimes people think the answer to that is just better road mapping. And I love a good roadmap. Like, don't get me wrong. I love a good roadmap, but that is not what we're talking about here, right? Like, before you even design your roadmap, there's a whole bunch of decision-making that has to happen. And then your roadmap should be continuously updating based on new information. And I think that's what we're focusing on here, is what's upstream of that.
Right. And the roadmap is basically the output of the multidimensional decision-making at a different level. So that you actually say, I print out this is the roadmap. But tomorrow it rained and snow, guess what? That roadmap needs to change.
Yes.
Right? So you can't think about the roadmap. And I think you're so right, Rachel, is that sometimes you have a relatively small company, but you would very urgently need portfolio management because the type of work, the different variations, then the finer tooth of the market and the customer needs and so on. Sometimes you could have a fairly large organization, but because they have a slightly different product, less evolved, it's like single products, very expensive to sell to very similar kind of the customer, but it's a larger dollar. So then you could have a large company with a relatively stable, you may not need a portfolio management quite a bit later. So I think the variable really is to say the number of decision making, the number of options, and the speed of the change, and how everyone needs to be quickly aligned on what we need to work on. So it's easy to say we want to double revenue, but how? Everyone has a different idea, right? So that's where things start to break down. So how are we going to double our revenue is the part, or the starting part of the portfolio management.
Yeah, actually, I'll give a quick example because I think it feeds into what you were saying, Becky. I was talking with a company recently, and the nature of their product is that they have elements of their product that sit between 2 businesses. So they have this B2B piece, but also parts of their product that sit between these businesses and their consumers, right? So that B2B2C kind of system. Right. And all of those constituents want different things, and they all want them right now. And so while they're not a very large company with a very complex product yet, the nature of all their different users, buyers, customers is causing so much information to come into the product organization so much demand of like, but now we want you to do this, and they don't have the capacity to deliver on all that. So I look at that situation and I say, you've got to make some really important investment decisions, right? And you need to be responsive because they're also trying to grow as a company. So they have to think about all these different customer/user/buyers and all their different needs and figure out how to move forward with that in a logical and appropriate way, knowing that every time they do something new, they're going to learn something, right? So to me, that's a great example of it's the nature of their market itself and the way they interface with that creates their complexity.
Right.
And I love that point around investment decisions. It is taking a lot of the traditional like financial portfolio logic and applying it to the product portfolio of decisions of different goals and different dimensions and different teams and different resources. And there's so many components that go into that. There was a great question that was asked in the last webinar series we did together that I'm going to throw into this as well, because I think it's really relevant. And it's a hard one. How can PPM help with predictability given the interdependencies of teams and the difficulty of understanding timelines with outcome-based roadmaps? So really kind of applying that to operationalization.
My audio had a hiccup right in the middle of you saying it. Will you say it one more time? Because I missed the center.
Yeah. How can PPM help with predictability given the interdependencies of teams and the difficulty of understanding timelines with outcome-based roadmaps? Becky, you want to kick that one off?
So I would say number one, it's not easy because things are moving forward. Just like when people talk about agile, right? So how do you know things are going to be done? So there are multiple variables coming into play. Therefore, that's why I'm a proponent of having a tool is that it's humanly impossible. But when you have a machine, when you have the data, when you have things together, it can help you to predict at least where you are based on what has happened in the past. So in the past, I mean, I literally spent my Sunday afternoon for the last 18 years writing different updates, try to pour over the data, try to figure out different team, different vector of the goals, the progresses, the resources, and trade-offs. So when you start to have a tool, you actually do have ability to see, are we making the progress in terms of the outcome, right? Because you track the outcome separately. And then you say, are we making the progress in our roadmap? Because, and these are two different things, right? And if your progress to the outcome is faster than you planned, you don't need to invest so much in the same roadmap. You can invest some other areas that are behind. So the prediction is really based on what has happened. You have a source of truth. You measure things and track them separately, and they give you the visibility to say, are we going to be on track to deliver the outcome? Are we going to be on track to ship the product? So hopefully we'll drive the outcome, or we need to make changes. What do you think, Rachel?
Yeah, I was just thinking about like there's a lot of different like elements that are at play when you're trying to manage this. I agree with what you said. I think when we make a strategic bet, right, which is really when we set an outcome, right? We're very smart people. We're knowledgeable about our markets. We cannot tell the future. So strategy is a hypothesis, and we're making a bet. We're saying we think if we do this, it will yield this result. And I think historically, a lot of our measures around those things have been very lagging indicators.
Right.
We do a whole bunch of work and we wait a long time to see if we're right. And what we're trying to get better at, I think, just generally as modern or technology organizations, is figuring out how to know earlier. Right. And so there's lots of ways to do that. There's lots of ways to, get early triggers, early information, test new features out. But all those tools are much more available to us now. And to your point, all of that is generating a ton of data at us. And so how are we leveraging that, taking advantage of that without Sunday afternoons being in front of the spreadsheet, right? To take advantage of all this wonderful information that's there so we can make better steering decisions. And all of that related to the way things depend on each other and the way things need to be sequenced and, you know, how quickly we want to go in any direction. We can't fall back into those behaviors that rely on those lagging indicators. We have to stay on top of the early information, even though it may not be complete, even though it may not give us 100% answer. This is the challenge and the beauty of being a product person, is we got to take that information, we got to take the data, and we got to marry it with our instinct and make the decisions to help the organization keep moving forward.
Right. And I will just add on to one more thing to that, is that quite often when we have a metrics, which is measuring our goal, trying to find the input metrics that leads to that. So if you find an input metric that's closer to your product features to hit the market, so then again, that finding the input metric, which is closer to the, you know, you could say conversion feature adoption, not exactly what drive revenue, for example, but it's close enough. So if you find that input metric, define it for your goals and track that, it gives you ability to at least fast track some of them.
It leads to another really great question from the previous webinar series. We've talked about, you shared the slide around allocation and reallocation, Becky, and a big component of looking at it as a portfolio is allocating across different dimensions. So one person had asked, how do you effectively communicate to the green teams that their resources will be reallocated to other teams while fostering a healthy and positive culture?
Right. That's a tough one. Rachel, you want to take that first?
I mean, to me, this goes back to that like triangle thing that I showed before. So first of all, if we have well formatted and functioning teams and we are communicating clearly to them the work that they're doing, and we are communicating clearly what strategy is, right? If that information is in the system, then following that up with a conversation of we are going to make a shift and here's why is less painful. There's always that human feeling of like, but I was working on this. I was excited about that, right? I don't want, like, now you're asking me to stop, right? And all the frustration that comes with that, that's a very human thing. But it's exacerbated and made much worse when people don't even have the big picture. They don't even understand. They don't know what other teams are working on. Then it just feels like, you know, you were driving in one direction and somebody just like yanked the wheel and turned it around. So there's a piece here of setting yourself up for those conversations if and when they need to be happening by doing the good work of making sure that the existing system is healthy, it's clear, it's aligned. All of that's going to make it easier. And outcomes also make it easier because we can talk about, right? Like, this is the outcome we're achieving. The outcome isn't to deliver this feature. Right. The outcome is to make this positive impact in the market for our customers. And so if we aren't doing that by delivering this feature, then we should stop.
Right. And I think it totally, Rachel, that's something that I've definitely experienced in previous. And I think what happens is previously, people want to say, hey, we launched a big project, we launched a big feature and big celebration. It feels shipping something is a celebration. But once you start to have an outcome focused mentality, say, hey, we are contributing to this goal and this needle moved. And now we're contributing to this goal and this needle moved. So the celebration is different. But regardless of which team you are on, you are contributing to the goal. Say, see that goal, that the fraud reduction or whatnot, our team contribute to it. There's, you know, the goals are shared. It doesn't matter, I'm a green team or red team. We contribute to that goal, right? So my name or feature, whatever's underneath it. So we don't celebrate, say, we ship, red team shipped this red button and then we're great, we celebrate. I don't want to do anything with the purple team, even though they need a red. Right. So if we get outcome focused, that people really celebrate the needles they move, it's a lot more satisfying.
Agreed.
I love that. And I love ending the conversation on outcome focused. It feels to wrap up the day really well. Becky, Rachel, we're at our time. Thank you so much for diving into portfolio management, when the time to make the transition is, and how people can do that. Really appreciated the conversation and all the great questions that we got and answered from the audience.